today are in listen and view only mode. After the presentation, there'll be a question and answer session, and you can submit a question at any time during the webinar. To do so, please type your question into the Q&A box located at the bottom center of your Zoom screen. You may need to move your cursor or tap your touchscreen device to see it. This webinar is being recorded today and will be available for viewing on the NADA website in coming days. I'll now hand you over to today's host, NADA's Clinical Director, Susie Hudson.
Thank you so much, Sun, and welcome everybody to this very important webinar today. Thanks for joining us. I am indeed Susie Hudson, Clinical Director at NADA, and I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're all on today. I'm on Gadigal land today as part of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to Aboriginal elders from the past, the present and emerging. We know that Aboriginal people, we have a lot to learn from both those who work in the sector and who reach out for support to the alcohol and other drug sector, and certainly have participated in Take Home Naloxone projects. I'd also like to acknowledge and highlight International Overdose Awareness Day that happens every year on the 31st of August. And this year's theme was around taking action. And we certainly feel here at NADA that the provision of take-home naloxone across the sector, across the community, is really key to acknowledging, remembering those that we have lost and preventing the harm that can occur in relation to opioid or overdose. So with not much further ado, we've got a lovely panel here today and you'll be hearing from them. We certainly have Liz Gall, our project consumer engagement coordinator here at NADA, and she has some special guests, Kevin and Gail, and they'll be joining us a little later on for some perspectives. But for now, I'd like to hand over to Angela Matheson, and she oversees, among other things, a harm minimisation and prevention program at the Centre for Alcohol and Other Drugs in New South Wales, and is key in the provision of the Take Home Naloxone rollout in New South Wales. So I'm going to hand over to her now to give us a bit of an update on Take Home Naloxone in the NGO sector. Over to you, Ange Matheson.
Hi everyone, I'm joining you from Gadigal land today. Thank you Susie, thank you NADA, thanks to everyone who's dialing in and participating in this session. All right, I've got a little presentation for you, so I'm just going to share my screen and we will take it from there. Okay, so thank you for taking the time to hear about Take Home Naloxone today. So I'm going to be providing a little bit of an update on some recent trends in opioid overdose harms and death and what it means for Take Home Naloxone program delivery. I'll also give a little bit of an update on what's happened so far with the NGO sector starting to deliver take-home naloxone interventions in New South Wales, which has been really exciting. And then I'll actually talk you through the processes of how you as a service can actually start delivering this program. So, all right. So we know that making naloxone more available in the community works. Naloxone quickly reverses the effects of an opioid overdose. We know that people can be trained really quickly and easily so that they can administer it correctly. And we also know that our clients appreciate being offered the opportunity to learn about overdose and naloxone and being skilled up and tooled up so that they can actually make a difference in their community. Historically, there have been some barriers to naloxone availability in the community. So essentially, the New South Wales Take Home Naloxone program and so many other Take Home Naloxone programs around Australia and the world have worked out ways to get naloxone to the people who need it and train them up so they know how to administer it. Okay, so part of what we've done in New South Wales is about increasing the availability of naloxone. So we've made it so that more different kinds of workers, consumer workers, various workers, Aboriginal health workers are able to supply naloxone. It used to just be doctors and pharmacists. We're also removing cost barriers in New South Wales. So NGOs can get trained for free and they can get naloxone for free. And that means that NGOs are able to then supply it to their clients for free. And also we recognise that stigma continues to be a barrier. And so we know that people really value being able to get naloxone from a service that they already know and trust. And that's where I see the NGO sector being really important. Okay, so I'm not going to dwell on this for too long, but it's some recently published data from the Pennington Institute. So I just wanted to point out that across Australia, the number of unintentional drug-induced deaths involving opioids has nearly tripled in the last 14 years. And opioids are identified in more than half of all of the unintentional drug deaths. And that was in 2019, the most recent data. So in the last 5 years of data that was collected there, we can see that there were more deaths from pharmaceutical opioids than from heroin across all of the age groups. And note, there's a really broad range of ages there where those deaths are occurring. Another recent trend that we've been noting in New South Wales. So since about October 2020, we've been seeing, and New South Wales Health has been putting out public drug alerts on the fact that in cocaine supply, there's been strong opioids found. So every couple of months, there seems to be a new cluster where people are overdosing. They think they're using a stimulant, but in fact, there's some opioids there in the mix. And there's been some heroin in there, some fentanyl, and some acetylfentanyl. So what do these trends mean for you and for your clients? Well, we think it's important for services to be offering naloxone to clients, whether they use illicit or pharmaceutical opioids, regardless of their age. And also because of those recent clusters in hospitalizations from cocaine use, we also think it's worth talking to clients who don't actually intentionally use opioids, just because there are some of these clusters happening and they may continue. All right, so moving on now to how the Take Home Naloxone program has been going so far in the NGO sector. Look, it's really new. It was only in March of this year that most NGOs, started to be able to supply naloxone. And they've gone really well so far. So I guess in the last year, there's been 52 training sessions delivered with the NGO sector. We've had 219 workers that have been trained and credentialed, and there's now 47 participating services. So those are just the NGO and some private providers that are now able to provide naloxone. In the first 3 months alone, we saw that there were 322 units of naloxone that was supplied by the NGO sector to date. So thank you very much. It's a really great start, I guess. So NGOs are now part of a broader kind of effort in New South Wales to increase access to naloxone. So we've got around 80 public health services that are supplying naloxone for free to people. Across New South Wales, there are over 800 community pharmacies that are now supplying naloxone for free. As I said, we've got 47 NGOs that are now able to do so. And of course, we would like more again. So I wanted to just show you a couple of quotes here from some of the services that have already started participating in take-home naloxone supply. Here's one from NGO. NGO have been part of this program from the start, really. There was a pilot program that was evaluated between 2016 and 2018, and NGO was really instrumental in putting that pilot together and working with Southeastern Sydney LHD in designing a program that was going to be suitable. We've also got a quote here from the lovely Rod Smith, who coordinates the NSP at ACON Sydney. And he was saying that he and their service is really, really excited that they can now be delivering this service. So next up, I'm going to kind of talk about the nuts and the bolts of how you actually get your service to start supplying take-home naloxone. So let me see, launching right in, I'm going to start from square one. I think some of the service that are participating today have probably already done these steps, but I thought I'd go start to finish. First thing you do is, if your service is interested in supplying naloxone to your clients, you need to fill out an expression of interest form and send it through to New South Wales Health. Providing your service is eligible, then New South Wales Health and your service will then sign a letter of agreement, and lo and behold, you can now get started. Next up is, you just need to get your workers and the manager who's going to be overseeing take-home naloxone delivery trained and credentialed. So New South Wales Health has contracted a training provider. So for the next year at least, that's going to be St John Ambulance. They deliver the training via Zoom. It takes a couple of hours, and we've been getting really good feedback on that. Next up, your service needs to identify a responsible person. Essentially, it's usually a manager. It's the key person that makes sure that your service is complying with the procedures document, make sure that staff are eligible, make sure that staff are trained, and make sure that you're ordering the naloxone and storing it in an appropriate way. Your service needs to have a suitable local governance structure in place. This really just means that your organisation is ensuring that the program is complying with the procedures, and make sure that staff are supported. And each organisation is going to have a really different way of doing this. Next up is some of the more practical stuff. You need to be supplying naloxone with labels on them. So you just need to print out some labels essentially, so you're ready to roll. You need to register for something called the PPA portal, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then you're almost ready to go in ordering your naloxone medications. So registering for the PPA portal. So the reason we're doing the portal at all is that the naloxone that our services, your services, are currently supplying is funded by the Australian government. And so we just need to make sure that non-government services are keeping the correct records. And that's so the Australian government has confidence that all of the PBS rules are being complied with. And it also just helps us know how the program is performing. We actually know that of the services that have started signing up to supply take-home naloxone, not all of them have yet registered for the PPA portal. So I just wanted to, I guess, underline why it's important to do so. There's an excellent PPA support centre. Those people on the 1-800 phone number, they're incredibly helpful. So I strongly recommend that you give them a call, and they will talk you through the steps you need to follow. All right, now we're into the really practical stuff. Once you've done all of those previous steps, you need to order your naloxone medicines. So we've got a really specific way that you can do that. So New South Wales Health has engaged a specific pharmaceutical wholesaler who you can place your orders with, and they will just deliver it to your service. So we've got a couple of bits and pieces that you would need to remember when you're placing your orders. One is that we send you a sales order template form. It's a PDF document, and it's got a code in the corner which is unique to your service. So essentially, every time your service needs to order naloxone, you just use that template form so that we know that it's your service that's ordering the stuff. There's a few email addresses there. When you need to place an order, you just need to send it to all three services. One is the people who deliver the stuff. The second one, Advance Pharma, that's the pharmaceutical company. And the third one, MOH Naloxone at Health, that's actually us at New South Wales Health, so that we know that you're placing an order. because you're just ordering a wholesale product here, you need to make sure that it's intact and not damaged when you're taking delivery of it. And importantly, you need to keep hold of the delivery docket that you'll get with the box of naloxone, because you need to send a copy of that back to New South Wales Health. And that's just for our documentation for when we're paying for it, essentially. Easy peasy. Okay, and then you just get onto the practicalities of what it is your service needs to be doing in order to be supplying the naloxone. One is that it's a Schedule 3 medicine, so there's just rules around the fact that you need to store it in a locked cabinet. So one of the things that your responsible person will do is make sure you've got a locked cabinet and make sure only the right people can access that. Next up, you just need to make sure you have documents printed and ready to go. I'll talk to you about that on the next slide. Then please start promoting Take Home Naloxone to your clients. So there are free print resources that you can display in your service. We heard back from one non-gov service that was COVID permitting. They were running barbecue breakfasts, and they were using that as an opportunity to talk to their clients and encourage their clients to do the take-home naloxone intervention. And that was a really great idea. They said it was really successful, so there's plenty of other ideas like that that you could be using. And then step 12, please go ahead and start supplying take-home naloxone to your clients, and we'd love to hear about your experience doing that, because we get really good feedback from the services, and services get great feedback from their clients. I talked about forms before, so that's really just make sure you have the bits of paper ready to roll for when a client walks in the door. So there's a take-home naloxone intervention form. That's just basically the clinical form, and it really sort of spells out the process that you need to have followed as a worker. So it's a sort of a checklist that helps you make sure that you're delivering the intervention correctly, amongst other things. Have the client questionnaire printed out, and this is really just a tool for getting the client to tell you what it is they do and don't know about naloxone and overdose, so that you can then, as a worker, fill in the gaps for them. Make sure you've got the consumer information sheets ready to roll so that you can hand them out to the client when you're delivering the intervention to them. And then there's promotional resources available. And in your locked cabinet where you keep the naloxone, you need to keep a track of how much stock is in there and who's taken stock out. So the stock control sheet, we provide a bit of a template for that, and that's just a really easy way that your service can keep track of the medicine movements. I've got the website there. That's the New South Wales Health website, has a bunch of pages that are specifically about take-home naloxone. So I recommend that you have a read of that, and that's where you can find links to all of those forms as well. So it's a really great go-to page. I mentioned the PPA portal before. Once you've signed up, there's actually not very much that you need to do, and services tell us that it's really easy. So each time you see a client and supply naloxone to them, there's just 4 bits of data that you need to record and key into the PPA portal. And then once a quarter, New South Wales Health asks that you fill out a bit of a report and send it to us. And that's really just super brief. It lets us know how services are going, whether services have support needs, and it kind of picks up early whether there's any data collection errors. So that's a really helpful thing for us to make sure that the program is going smoothly. And so, yeah, this is kind of it. That's our contact email address there. Every 2 or 3 months, we run a meeting for the non-gov services that are participating. Please come along. It's a really good way to share experiences, ask each other questions. Yeah, so it's meant to be kind of quite a sharing environment, really. make sure you check out the New South Wales Health webpage because it's got all of the documents and answers that you're probably looking for. And before I go, I just wanted to leave this last slide up here for, I guess, consideration for the discussion that comes next. It's really just about some thoughts on how you could ensure that your service can make talking about naloxone a really normal thing for workers to be doing, and also a really normal service for clients to be receiving. So I can leave that up until Susie decides that we're moving on to the next stage. But yeah, that's all from me, and I'm very happy to see how the discussion goes and help out if I can.
Thanks so much, Ange. I think that last slide is a really important one and tells us something about how we can really tap into the consumer voice and the lived experience voice to normalise this, to make it part and parcel of everyday service provision. So thank you so much for that. I'll ask you now to stop sharing, but I know that you'll be sticking around to answer some questions, so everybody can stay tuned for that. I'd like to now invite Liz Gall, who, as I indicated, is NADA's Consumer Engagement Coordinator, to join us again, and her wonderful guests, Kevin and Gail. And they're going to really take us through that lived experience perspective and, I suppose, help us to really understand how important this intervention is, and perhaps give us some tips about how we should be thinking about integrating it into our care. So over to you, Liz. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Susie and Ange. That was really great. Lots of good information in there. So I would like to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the country of the Wongal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. And today we have Kevin Street and Gail Gray joining us, and I'm very excited that they are both on here. So thank you so much for coming along. And we will be given a consumer perspective on the importance of the Take Home Naloxone program, and some potentially some tips around how to have discussions around that. So Kevin is a person with 35 years of lived experience of opiate use, and he has been receiving treatment for this for the last 2.5 years. Kevin is an advocate for consumer participation in service delivery and currently holds several service positions with consumer representative groups, including with NADA. Kevin is also an advocate for drug law reform and AOD service expansion. Thank you, Kevin. And Gail is a Gumbaynggirr Wiradjuri woman. She's a caseworker with the Community Restorative Centre, working with women pre and post release. She has lived experience of addiction and is now in recovery. Gail is very passionate about supporting people with addiction challenges and strongly supports harm minimisation strategies to save lives. So like I said, very, very honoured today to have you both here. Thank you so much again. So just to kick you off with the first question, as we all know, Take Home Naloxone saves lives, and therefore should be an important part of people's treatment journey. One of the things that we know from some feedback and research, that there is some hesitancy from AOD services and workers about providing Take Home Naloxone. Some of the feedback about workers' concerns has been that they're worried if they provide take-home naloxone to a client, they may treat the naloxone as a safety net against overdose, which will encourage them to use. As someone who has lived experience of opioid use, what feedback and advice can you give to workers who are worried about this? And I guess also weighing up within that the importance of all services having a take-home naloxone program. Gail, we might start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name's Gail Gray. I'm a proud Gumbaynggirr and a Wiradjuri woman, and I'd like to pay respects to the Darug people. I'm here in Western Sydney, on their country. Yeah, this is a great initiative. Look, when I saw that question about, you know, AOD workers worried about this, it made me think, you know, straight away that I would support anyone in this field to take that window of opportunity, because it's a real matter of life and death. You know, like from my own experience of, I guess, leaving a rehab or, you know, a detox or an outpatient, being in an outpatient program, I guess that window of opportunity is really important, because, you know, you'll get people that have, you know, the fog's lifted a bit enough for them to have some awareness around keeping themselves safe, you know, and even just encouraging people to not use alone as well, you know, with, I guess, with that Take Home Naloxone. Yeah, I like, that'd be the farthest thing. I mean, I can't make anyone use drugs. Do you know what I mean? I can't encourage anybody. They're going to make that decision for themselves. And, you know, I guess my main concern would just be more that I don't want them to die, you know, so I just do my part. You know, I know if you're in the AOD sector, then you're in the business of saving lives, you know, and so that would kind of be my primary concern. And yeah, look, I'm just a big advocate for a window of opportunity, because essentially a person could die. Their next shot could be their last. So I guess I really wanted to emphasize that. Take that opportunity, you know, don't be scared to ask the hard questions, or to, you know, to actually express your concern for someone in having, you know, something that essentially is going to save their life when no one else is around, or, you know, of having a family member or somebody close that can, you know, kind of know that they've got that, you know, naloxone, and that could essentially use it if they need, you know. So I really encourage people to take that window of opportunity when you've got it. Just, you know, whether you could be giving someone a care pack or a freedom pack like we do in the service that I work at. So it'd be something that I want to put in there, even, you know, even just for them to have. They could, and, you know, obviously a brief information about it. But I guess, yeah, the window of opportunity is the really important one, where you'll have people's attention. You'll be able to, you know, talk to them and at least plant that seed of awareness that of having that on them could save their life. So yeah, that's it. Sorry, thanks.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Gail. And I couldn't agree more. It is that space when someone's in a space of being in a treatment or at a service, they might be there and they might be ready to listen. And it is very important to have those conversations when they're there, not when it's too late. Thank you so much. Kevin, what are your thoughts? You know, if someone's going to use, is it because they've got a bit of plastic in their pocket?
No. You got to bear in mind, if someone's sort of just left jail, just left the rehab, just left the detox facility, their tolerances towards opiates are down, and that is a real sort of dangerous time and situation for people to be in. Many a time I've left a detox and said to the worker, you won't see me back here, I'm never going to use again, only to be 6, 12, 18 months later knocking on the door saying, I used again, can I come back in? You know, I firmly believe that Take Home Naloxone should be standard part of a discharge kit, and I think there should be some honest conversations around drug use and relapsing drug use. You know, we practice harm reduction for alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana. Why can't we start practicing harm reduction around opiate use? And it was just interesting looking at the stats from before that the majority of opiate overdoses have come from prescription medication. And I'm sure if someone had that in their home, someone's child or someone's parent had naloxone available in the home, whether it was Nixoid or Pramoxide, whatever you prefer, that a life may have been saved. And as I said before, people are going to use naloxone or not. And it's just the nature of addiction. It's a relapsing condition, and it can take people, it can take people several attempts at achieving abstinence. Also, I made some sort of, and you got to look at the fact that too, there's fentanyl contaminants in other drugs. You know, people are snorting cocaine or smoking methamphetamines. And a lot of those drugs are now found to be contaminated with fentanyl, which is quite a dangerous opiate. I think it's 100 times more stronger than heroin or something like that. I forget the actual figure, but it's a massive amount. And if naloxone is available, it's going to save a life. I know I've overdosed several times in my life, in my using life, and if it wasn't for someone who had the product on hand, I wouldn't be sitting here talking into this camera today. So I'm a firm believer in carrying. I like to carry the Nixoid. I like the spray. It's easier to administer. It's in my bag at all times when I walk out of the door, because I may come across someone who's in an opiate overdose situation where I could administer that. And at least sort of get them on the track to sort of coming back around while we're waiting for the ambulance. And I've trained a lot of people in the use of Promoxode and the Nixoid spray, and I encourage people to carry it. We also take them through the signs of overdose, opiate overdose, sorry. And it's just, I think it should be standard practice. It's standard practice that people are trained how to use this, encouraged to carry it, have it in your handbag, in your backpack, in your glove box, in your cupboard. It's just I stopped calling it a life-saving drug. I'm starting to call it a life-saving medicine, because I'm trying to sort of move away from that whole connotation of it's a drug, even though it is a drug, but it's a medicine within itself, and it saves lives, and will continue to save lives. And thanks for that, Liz. Thank you.
No, thank you, Kevin. That was really great. And I think that's a really important, and you mentioned that to me recently about our beginning to call it a medicine, because there is so much shame and so much stigma around the word drug, that it's good to change that language, I think, for some people. And as has been mentioned, it's really important to have conversations with people about harm reduction, including through naloxone availability. Really helps to reduce the shame and stigma. You know, if someone's a first point of, if they're the first kind of point of call when in speaking with consumers about this stuff, then the way they approach how they speak with consumers is really important. So the next question that I wanted you guys to speak on is, do you have any tips in how staff may be able to have conversations around naloxone, around harm minimization in a way that reduces judgment, reduces the shame being felt by the consumer, which could lead to consumers being more open and willing to have the conversation. And I think including in cases where potentially a consumer is about to leave a service and saying, no, I don't want to take this with me, or I don't want a prescription for this because I'm never going to use again. Gail, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, no, good question. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Kevin. That was, really good to hear that stuff. Look, I guess it's initially it would be an early conversation, earlier before they leave a facility, or before, like maybe a small kind of education workshops for people that are in program. Instead of, I think in a group or just, individually, somebody before they're leaving, and normalizing it, like I'd really, like I always kind of really, I guess, watching body language, my responses, and coming from a really genuine space, because it is, you're dealing with somebody that, for me, it was a really shameful thing. It was quite difficult for me to, it took me a long time to ask for help, in the beginning. So I guess, yeah, early on having conversations, you know, I guess, you know, I guess having people with the lived experience, having that conversation with people as well would, like, the connection, you get the connection really quickly, or, you know, be able to relate. Somebody that's been through it, that's got the lived experience around it. If you've got any staff, you know, in your service, whatever AOD service you're in, you could ask the client if they, you know, if they'd be open to talking to someone, you know, with experience, because, you know, sometimes I think that can really, you know, penetrate, get through to somebody. You're talking to someone who's been there and done that. So I think that would be a really effective way of having conversation with people, you know, and you know, like you said, Liz, like, I mean, you could bring it up, and if they don't want it, then it's completely up to them, you know. But I guess even just asking the question and you know, encouraging them to take it home, have it on them would just be a start, you know. It would be something that could yeah, potentially, you know, save their life, you know, and then they'll have the knowledge of that, and maybe pass it on to other people that they're running into that, you know, that are using at rates that it puts them, you know, at really high risk. Yeah. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Gail. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Gail. It's a conversation that has to be had, I think, whenever anyone's being discharged from any sort of treatment facility. It's a conversation that's got to be had. It's got to be open. It's got to be honest, and it's got to be non-judgmental, and it's got to use language like, yeah, we're offering you take home naloxone, not saying that you may use again, but saying, but empowering the person. Say, if you choose to use again, there's this life-saving medicine available in your cupboard. And as Gail mentioned before, the person carrying the naloxone may come across an overdose situation where they are then saving someone else's life rather than using it on themselves. It's a difficult question to have. And I was talking before, I was a long-term service user at the Supervised Injection Centre. And I got onto a treatment, and I haven't been back to that centre to use drugs. I've been back to that centre, pardon me, on the consumer representative side. And about 3 or 4 weeks after I stopped going to the centre, Dr. Marianne John, she said, Kevin, you know, you're always welcome to come back here and use drugs if you choose to do that. And a part of me went, I'll show some faith in me, Marianne. But then I thought about it, and she was actually coming from a really sort of caring space, saying, Kevin, if you choose to use drugs again, please come here to do it so we can keep you safe. And I think the same sort of tone has to be in that conversation when you're offering someone take home naloxone kits. And as I said before, I think it should be a standard part of any discharge package that you're giving them, whether it's actual prescription or whether it's the product itself. If you're not going to use it, it's not going to take up much space in your cupboard. But if you choose to use it, it's going to save a life. And it may be yours, it may be a loved one, it may be a child, it may be a parent, it may be your next door neighbour. It's there if needed, you know. If it's not needed, great. But if it's needed, it's there and available to you to use on somebody or yourself. How to have those conversations? I don't know. At times I don't have a bit of much of a filter. When I'm having those conversations, I say, look, it's important to have. You should have it. Please take it. I'll just leave it there. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you so much, Kevin and Gail, once again. And I think the really take-home thing for me is have the conversation. You know, from that consumer perspective, the conversations need to be had. If that doesn't happen, the knowledge isn't there and the option isn't available. So sign up for the program, have the conversations, and do it in an open way, you know, without the shame, without the judgment. And if somebody, you know, uses after times not using, that's completely okay. Let's make sure the priority is that they stay alive. I will hand back over to Susie. Thank you both again so much.
Thanks,
Thanks
Liz.
so much, Liz and Gail and Kevin. Stay with us, please, because I just think those insights are just so helpful and really tell us how the provision of naloxone is part of the treatment. It's not something that sits outside of the treatment. And when we weave it into a program, so as you all have been saying, as part of the admission process or the orientation to a service, it just becomes part of what you provide and it becomes normalized, as you said. And truly, I suppose, as you've all said, it's perhaps tapping into that idea of, hey, you may not need to use it, but hey, there might be some people that you love and care about who it could be useful for. And so this provides you the opportunity to support those who you care and love. At this point, I really strongly encourage anybody online who has some questions for us to please pop them into the Q&A box, and I'd be happy to ask all of our guests today those questions. But I wanted to start with one question, Ange. You mentioned there, obviously, there's a process and services engage in a period of training and credentialing. Now, I believe some of our services have been a bit concerned with staff turnover. That's a bit of a situation we can all face in the sector. What's your advice around perhaps if a series of staff have been trained but they've moved on from jobs at a particular service? What could a service do to ensure that they get some more staff through the training? How might they go about that?
Well, that's easy, Susie. So we understand that, you know, staff move on. That's kind of the nature of the beast, really. So I guess we suggest when a service starts up with supplying naloxone, that you get maybe 8 people trained, 8 staff members. The idea there is that, you know, even if people are having a day off or whatever, there's always going to be someone in the service who's available to provide. But recognizing that at some point you'll have a fair bit of staff changeover, we've committed to essentially continuing to make the training available. So you need to have done the training and credentialing in order to be allowed to supply naloxone, just because it's a medicine and there's rules around medicine supply. But essentially, it's really quick just to get in contact with New South Wales Health and say, hey, we've got another 5 people who need training. And then you can find out when the next training offering will be. Essentially, there'll be training at least once a month. So it'll be fairly easy and quick for you to get in and get all your new staff trained up.
That's great, Ange. And I suppose it really taps too into what Kevin and Gail and Liz have been saying, that I suppose if you as an organisation are going to absolutely see this as part of treatment, which we would say it is, that perhaps it's actually worth getting all of your staff trained up. Is there any limit to the amount of staff that you can have trained as part of the program?
Look, I mean, we've said at the outset on our website that we recommend 8, but you know, we recognise that there could be loads of reasons why your service might want to train a whole lot more people than that. So yeah, please just get in contact with us and we're very open to the discussion.
Great. Another thing you mentioned, Ange, was that there are some meetings that NGOs can come along to. Can you just tell us again how someone who might be, you know, they've gone through a bit of the process, they're just not sure how to implement in terms of within their organisation, how might they sign up for those meetings?
Okay, so the 47 services that have already signed up, every couple of months we'll send out a meeting invitation. We've just been running it as like a Teams meeting, goes for about an hour. And we find that we get on the line some services that are they're all over it. They've been doing it from the start and they've got a lot of wisdom to share. We also find that we get some people dialing into those meetings who've done the training, but there's a certain point where they haven't got it across the line yet. And we really think that's a great idea, because then you get to have that information sharing about what the sticky bits are for a service and how another service might have gotten through that. So yes, please come along
Excellent.
to those.
Now, I want to ask this question. I've got another question here, and Gail and Kevin and Liz, you may have some thoughts on this, and I think it's something that you've touched on a little bit. Obviously, some of our services feel like, well, I'll wait until a client comes along who perhaps has identified that their primary drug of concern is an opioid. But what I've heard you all say is that, hey, maybe that's not really the case. And it could be a situation, as you said, Kevin, where a person, and you had mentioned, Ange, that there have been some clusters of people purchasing stimulant drugs. So they think they're purchasing cocaine or another stimulant. And then lo and behold, there is an adulterant in there, which is an opioid, or indeed perhaps, someone is using a prescribed medication, an opioid prescribed medication. So what would you, in that case, and I might ask you first, Kevin, this idea that we should sort of select clients, or what do you think? Is it perhaps better to just talk about it with everybody that comes through the door?
I think it should be spoken about with everybody. I actually had a situation about a year ago where I know some people who work for Big Pharma, and their offices are in Oxford Street, and several times they'd noticed people in what they deemed to be sort of opiate overdose situations, and they didn't know what to do. So I went along to their office, and they got all their company representatives and all their company employees into the office in one space, in one day, and a fellow consumer representative and I went down there, and we trained them in opiate overdose recognition and how to use both the injectable and the nasal naloxone. And they were very, very happy. They're all now carrying it in their handbags and their backpacks and their briefcases.
Fantastic.
Because they come across, they are what I would be called, the straight citizenry, but they are caring people, and they're in situations where they can actually save a life. So I think we should talk to everybody about it and not just target the opiate user, because that's sort of so stigmatizing, actually. It's removing the opiate user from the rest of us, and I think that's wrong. It's just another sort of stigmatizing aspect of it all. I'd like to train mums and dads in the use.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point too, Kevin. And perhaps Gail, when talking about communities, we know that Aboriginal communities we've got a lot to learn from Aboriginal communities in terms of their sense of community. What's your sort of thoughts about just talking about it to everybody?
Yeah, look, I guess I love what Kevin was saying. I totally agree with everybody being educated around this, and so whole communities, I guess, Aboriginal Medical Services play a huge part. They've got, AOD units, they go into communities, and, kind of do some educational stuff with people, communities. But I guess, it'd kind of be spread through the community, you could just tell someone in the community and it'll spread like, you could just let them know this could actually save lives, and for everyone to have it, because, I've worked with women and before that their partners were using, and they've never before in their life, and they've got children in the house and that kind of thing, so families, it's really important, like Kevin touched on, for everybody in the community, somebody, who's well known in that community. Like, it could be an elder, it could be
someone respected.
Somebody really respected, or one of the Aboriginal services, to sort of that have worked with, within the communities, can go in there. Because there's a bit of a trust barrier, and but once you get in there and get to know people, the word, you could spread it, and to keep the community safe. And I think people would be quite happy to get on board, and to keep mobs safe.
Fantastic. Yeah, and which leads me neatly on to another question we have here. And it's about that idea of, it might be the family or significant others that may need to use the take-home naloxone. And how do you recommend AOD workers engage with family and friends and significant others? In other states, apparently they've done some training days with community invited. Perhaps, Ange, could you tell us initially, is the Ministry of Health thinking about providing training across New South Wales to sort of local community members? Is that something that's in the remit, or can you shed any light on that?
So our Take Home Naloxone program, and also the naloxone access scheme that the Australian government runs, they're all, so the groups who are eligible for both of those programs are people who are at risk of an opioid overdose themselves, as well as the broader community. And I suppose we've started with mostly drug and alcohol services. So just in practice, most of the clients that are receiving the take-home naloxone intervention in the first instance have been people with personal use of opioids. We're really open to suggestions about how services might want to take that out. You could do outreach events. We've heard of services doing at, an annual event where you do get family and friends there. So, it's, I guess, don't think about it as an intervention that just needs to happen in the confines of your service. So you can take it in the outreach bus. You can take it to events where you think that relevant family and carers will be. So yeah, there's lots of options there, and we kind of think that the participating non-government services are probably the experts in the best events to be focusing on there and getting out to.
Great. And so that tells us, yes, there's a real, there's a breadth of things that people can be doing. And I suppose though, what's coming through today, and Liz, maybe you could speak to this, is how we can really engage people with lived experience, so consumers of both services who may have experienced using alcohol and other drugs, how they can be some of these advocates and ambassadors for programs like this, to talk to families, to know how to talk to community members. What's your thoughts on that? Is that something that we should try to really grow?
Oh, I think definitely. I think in all aspects of AOD services, there should be the lived experience voice, because who knows better than we do what we need and how to approach people with these things. Yeah. Sorry, I've just gone completely blank, but I 100% agree that it's something that should be done. And, I mean, Kevin is a perfect example of that. He's someone who provides training, who can have those conversations. And, I think even being able to have the conversations with the family members as well,
yeah.
Where they're not just hearing whether it's their partners or their child's kind of excuses around their use, where they're hearing from someone else, who actually, has a somewhat similar perspective on it, a lot of education around it, and also the lived experience on it, so getting that different perspective. And it's just like, oh, it's not just this person making excuses,
Yeah, and there's a role for them too, I suppose, in that.
Yeah 100%. Yeah.
And I suppose, when you're thinking from a program point of view, we have traditionally in the drug and alcohol sector sort of sidelines friends and family members. And I think we've learned over time how important it is to bring those significant others, the community, any supports we can grab to wrap around that person. And so perhaps, there's a possibility there to see how do we provide this information to those support people as part of, here's a telephone line for you to call, or here's a service that you might want to tap into. And do you know about the availability of naloxone should you need it? Kevin, have you spoken to many family members about the use of naloxone? Is that something that you've had experience with?
Yes, I've been to a couple of family drug support services meetings, and I've spoken to them about having sort of a naloxone at home. About 18 months ago, Kyle Cox and I, we put out a YouTube video on the use of naloxone. I think that's still available.
Great.
I encourage everybody to have it in a first aid kit. As simple as those blankets you put in, or a face shield for giving someone CPR. I think a box of Nixoid or Pramoxide should be standard in every first aid kit that's ever distributed to people. You just look at that Pennington report on opiate deaths, you know, and it's not just the heroin user that's dying from opiate overdoses. A massive amount of people are dying from prescription tablets. And, you know, I'm sure there'll be some child at home thinking now, why wasn't that stuff available? I may have saved my mum, or I may have been able to save my dad or my brother from an overdose incident because they've taken too many prescription pills. And but I've gotten a lot of feedback from the family drug support services meetings that I go to, and talk to them with someone from lived experience of opiate use. And I've taken along a few samples at times and showed them how easy it is to use. And I talked to them about the signs of opiate overdose, what to look for. And I've been quite well received. And no one was that this stuff is available, that is actually encouraging drug use. You know, they see it as being able to save the family member.
Absolutely, and that echoes a comment that we've just had come through, that, you know, wishing that it was around when this person was younger, so that they could actually support their siblings, and they had to wait for the ambulance to come, and the fact that they could have perhaps stepped in, particularly in non-English speaking backgrounds. And as you've mentioned too, Gail, you know, everybody's sort of touched on the fact that there's a huge amount of stigma associated, irrespective of what opioid you might be using, but that this there's an opportunity here. There's another question that's come through that I'd like to ask, and it talks about consumers being worried to use Take Home Naloxone on a friend because they've seen it, witnessed, I suppose, friends perhaps being Narcaned via the ambulance service or other experience. It wasn't a particularly nice experience. How would you recommend workers who don't have lived experience talk about this if they don't really understand what that experience is like and they don't have peer workers?
I'll jump in here.
Please.
The Narcan that you're administered by ambulance is much, much stronger than what you can get as a take-home package of Nixoid Pramoxide. I'd rather be alive than have my sort of so-called stone interrupted. You know, like if someone's got to the stage where Narcan is needed, they are near death. And the two times that I have been Narcaned in my life, both times I was clinically dead. I surprisingly didn't come out of it angry or anything. I'd realised what was happening and was quite thankful. Given the fact that, you know, you give someone a squirt of Nixoid up the nose, it's only going to last for an hour or so. You know, they can go back into opiate overdose. You know, it doesn't kick the opiate receptors off the brain and send them away forever. It's just a small, brief intervention. So further medical help can be sought. Police in Western Australia are carrying the Nixoid spray now, apparently, and I've been entering into conversations with not so much the unions, but talking to the police around King's Cross, encouraging them to carry it because they come across overdose situations and they can't do anything bar ring the ambulance, and that might take 5 or 10 minutes for the ambulance to get there. And a brain without oxygen for 5 or 10 minutes is going to cause a lot of damage. If they can have that brief intervention of at least administrating one squirt up the nose of someone who's in opiate overdose, it's going to save lives. It's going to save brain damage. It's going to keep someone alive.
Look, we don't have any other questions at this point in time. And so what I'd like to invite everybody who's online to do is to absolutely reach out. You can reach out to Liz at NADA. She's in contact with Gail and Kevin. You can reach out to me. You can reach out to Ange and her colleagues at the Ministry of Health. There's lots and lots of information on the Ministry of Health website. You can be coming along to support meetings in terms of implementation. But I think what everybody is really saying is that this is part of treatment provision, that we're all part of this solution, as are all community members. And what we want to do is to really embed it into the services we provide, because as everybody has said quite eloquently, you know, accessing treatment will not work if you're not here with us. And we really need to save lives, and everybody's got an opportunity to do that. And so if there's anything that we can do, please reach out. But I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our presenters and panel members today. Gail, thank you so much. Kevin, Liz and Ange. We will absolutely be popping this up on our website, and we'd encourage you to reach out if you need any support whatsoever. Have a great day, everybody, and take good care.
Thanks,
Bye.
Susie.